Well, good morning, everybody. As we start off another week here, we just look back on Sunday at some satellite data, watching once again just a large number of extremely powerful storms just rolling throughout the central plains of the United States. We also saw some deeper convection in parts of the southeast as well, and you can see these right as the sun was setting, some of these storms that popped up here in parts of Alabama, just as an example. Also had some larger ones here in parts of Kentucky. But it was the storms in the central United States that I saw a lot of, just given some of the hail that was in some of these storms. And of course, there were more reports of large tornadoes, bringing our statistics way above their historical averages for tornadoes, hail, and wind, which we covered last week. At the end of the animation last night, we can see our next deep low that spread a lot of cloud cover into the Pacific Northwest. And this has just been one of what has been dozens of lows over the last 45 days, almost 50 days now, given the pattern we've been in. And we questioned all last week if this pattern can change and what it would take to change. And it was good to watch the weekend model run stay relatively consistent with our thoughts last week. But before I get to that, I wanted to show you the last 72 hours, so weekend precipitation totals here, just to kind of give you a glimpse of what this past weekend's stormy weather looked like. And I'm going to add to this the 4 days that preceded that and just give you the 7-day total precipitation. And it again has been this interesting sequence of events, just to pick on one area, to watch the storms roll through this area, send their outflow back to the west, and we've seen this interaction between the dry line, the cap rock, and the outflow to produce just large storms that have been down here into Texas, and just repeated tornadic events and large hail events. Now, that's not to take away from anything else that's been farther to the north, and we did bring some really good rain into parts of extremely dry parts of Colorado and Kansas and Oklahoma. But just thinking this through, that hail has been just it's been ridiculous. I saw reports down in Texas of another 5-inch hail event. And if we just take a look at what the radar estimated, just the last 3 days alone down in the southern plains, it's been just a really, really tough go. And that's not to take away from these much bigger storms that have been in the north as well. Just again, looking at this hail data. I got a picture here from a guy named Alex, work with him. He's in Sterling, Colorado. He was just showing me some of the hail. I mean, remember, it doesn't take the 5-inch stuff to do a lot of damage. And with this hail, there was a lot of heavy rain. He also sent me a video of some of the cattle here going through a washed out area just due to some of the extremely heavy rain from some of these thunderstorms. Just an incredible video, Alex. Thank you for sharing this with me, just so I can get an idea of what's going on in your part of the world. If we want to look back over the last, yesterday at the severe weather reports on the 2nd, we added another 201 reports, 10 tornadoes. But again, it's a lot of these large hail events that have rolled through this area that just keep grabbing my attention. I did want to bring this back up. Now that we've kind of seen all of the preliminary reports put in, we're almost to 1,400 reports, including 68 tornadoes back on the 26th. Remember, this was that day that was approaching record-setting number of severe wind and hail and tornado events. So I just wanted to keep you up to speed on this. But ultimately, all of that boils down to these next couple of maps. And since April 15th, when this pattern got going, we're looking here at total precipitation ranks by climate district. And if you just think about this as a common planting time, for example, the Western Corn Belt, we've got coming out of this part of Nebraska and across the northern tier of Iowa, 3 climate reporting districts that are having their wettest April 15 to June 2nd time period on record. We've been very wet in parts of Kentucky, Tennessee. We've been extremely wet in parts of Texas as well, getting into Louisiana. But I want to just take note of those dry areas again. I mean, if you just get south of that line, limited chances for rain, extremely hot conditions. We know about the drought that's in Mexico that's kept so much of the southwest very dry. And we have concerns as to what this might do as this new ridge kind of flexes its way in to the Pacific Northwest here in the coming days, because that's going to completely reverse this temperature pattern we've been in since that time frame. Going back again to mid-April up until June 2nd, looks like I clicked on precipitation ranks. I was going to say, that doesn't look right. We'll come back to this in just a few moments when I reproduce this map. But we've had a lot of cooler weather in the west, while we've not seen, the cool off in the east. And you can just imagine, if you look at this, what this has done is we've seen storm tracks that have come through like this. We've seen storm tracks that have come through like that. And the reality of it is that as this dives into the Great Basin, it's a drier pattern. But as it comes off of the Rocky Mountains, it opens up the Gulf of Mexico. We've had no trouble transporting that moisture, despite not having a big Bermuda high into the midsection of the country, into the mid-south, down into across the southern United States. These storm systems have tended to curl to the north, which has left the northeast relatively dry as well. And again, just to stress, that large ridge that's kind of occupied this area during this whole time period is what's kept Mexico into Florida dry. Let's see if that map finished. There we go. That's what I wanted to show you. So from mid-April to early June here, we're now looking at temperature ranks. So that's the position of the trough. There it is. That's the colder air that's helped support that. And here's where the warm air from the Gulf has just lived. And so this, again, is just looking at those temperature ranks. Okay, so all of that was created by this. And this is a summary. We watched very warm ocean temperatures build here between Hawaii and Alaska. And right along the northern edge there, that is where we have kind of our zone of greatest change in temperature. There's a front there, and it's being aided by the ocean temperatures. So based upon the thermal wind relationship, you have higher heights here, and therefore higher pressure, and lower heights there, or lower pressure. And what happens is the flow goes right between the two. It's a blend of the Coriolis effect and also the pressure gradient. That is what has accelerated the jet into this area. Now, if you flip these, we have the entire opposite thing, all right? In other words, if it was cool in here and warm up there, we'd have no flow out of this jet stream. But this is what it's done. And what I'm going to show you is, in this week and pressing into next week, we're about to just change this. Where there's been that high pressure here, okay, by the time you get to the 5th, there's a trough of low pressure. This has been aided along by several factors we talked about last week, but it results in this blocking pattern, this high over a low block here. And with this high, we're going to be seeing this. There's the high position right in through there. We're going to be seeing very, very hot temperatures moving throughout the western United States. And our big goal, the goal I have this week and beyond, is to understand if this is going to start to build into kind of a new regime. Is it going to be able to outdo the warmth that's in the North Pacific and start to build in more frequent ridges in the western United States? That's what I'm trying to figure out. So if we think this through, remember, we've still got a few more days until we get there. But already we see that throughout the West, we have excessive heat watches and warnings. There's stronger winds across parts of the Pacific Northwest, plus this right up and through here. If we could take a look here at these color bar, we can see we're expecting to have a pretty rapid change in things across the Northwest first and then California later. So this is going to be a really quick change in this pattern that we've been in for so long. Severe weather continues right here in parts of Kansas, down into Oklahoma this morning. And I was watching on radar some of the storms, just blow that up once or twice, just to see the complex of storms rolling through that area. This animation goes back to just a little before midnight last night, watching the current systems roll across the country. Thunderstorms this morning, just having a quick look at it. This is where we've got active lightning strikes. So in parts of the upper Midwest getting into Wisconsin, then coming out of Kansas into Oklahoma here down into Arkansas, we have a few stronger complexes of storms, which you just saw have the severe thunderstorm watches out for them. Okay, getting into the maps. This is today's Storm Prediction Center outlook. So again, we're going to watch northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and a broad area stretching from Texas and Oklahoma over toward the Delta. Once we get into tomorrow, we're going to keep an eye on this region here, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska. And this is an area that has been repeatedly hit with powerful thunderstorms this year. So I imagine a lot of you are going to be watching this quite carefully in this area. But by the time we get to the 5th, this is when the ridge begins to build in. And what this will likely do is slow down these larger complexes of severe storms. In other words, we won't see this, sweeping areas of severe weather, but instead isolated convection that will still be able to produce strong to severe weather. But with that ridge coming in the west, it's going to change things up. But before we get there, take a look. This is starting off this morning at 7 a.m. Central Time. I think the model was better initialized today than it was last week. A lot of wet weather throughout the Northwest. Here's our storm complexes early this morning. As we play this through the middle of the day, getting into this evening, this is why we've got this area under slight risk. Notice that there's the potential for two different kind of squall line events taking place later today. One in Wisconsin, northern Illinois, another one into parts of Missouri, Arkansas, coming out of parts of Oklahoma into Texas. We'll keep a close eye on those tonight. This is through the overnight hours, getting into tomorrow morning. So that low that came through the Northwest is going to head up here toward parts of Saskatchewan and Manitoba and spin, leaving a front a little bit farther to the south of it. And what will be interesting to watch is, as that low stays in that area, so this is Tuesday night, frontal boundary coming through here, isolated convection through a large area of the southeast. What will happen is that low will eventually just start to live right down here over this part of the Great Lakes. And that's when our pattern change is really going to be realized. So over the next 7 days, most of the precipitation that you see on this is coming just in the next couple. This is our 7-day artificial intelligence forecast. This is the National Blend of Models forecast. Here is the WPC forecast. And again, a lot of what you see in through here and in the Northwest is coming in the next couple of days, including the heavier precip in the Canadian Prairie. This would be the European model 7-day forecast. And this is the GFS. A little different on the heavier rains to the south. I'll show you why in a second. But if you blend it all together, this is the chance of getting an inch over the next week. And that is different, right? We've watched for weeks the deepest reds covering large areas here in the central United States, from Texas to the Dakotas, all the way over here into parts of the eastern Corn Belt, down in the southeast even. And now we look over the next 7 days and start to see these numbers peeling back a bit. If I show you where the chances are for being under a half inch, let's go back to the previous run there. This is where, let's do that one. There we go. This is over the next 10 days. We start to see drier air coming out of Alberta and Saskatchewan into, Montana, which was very wet in early May, into the Dakotas. The Southwest stays drier. And if you take note, there will be an area in through here that has a chance at staying under a half inch in total in parts of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, possibly pushing up toward Michigan as well. Keep an eye on that region just for a drier stretch. To see the models, here's the GFS on the left and the European on the right. And let's just play this through starting at 7 a.m. this morning. Watching the next low there, it is curling up into the Canadian Prairie. And then watch, it's just going to, by the time we get to Thursday and Friday, it just went way up here, spun its way around, and it's coming right toward the Great Lakes. And when it sits there, this will be at that time of the week where there'll be a large ridge living in the west. And that's through Saturday into Sunday. And if you noticed, there will be some storms that follow in through this corridor. Do they follow farther to the south? Are they a bit farther to the north? Still yet to be determined this weekend. But again, this is all part of kind of a frontal boundary that's going to live in this area. And if we just play through Saturday, getting into Sunday and into Monday, see that boundary still lives in that region. It's better shown in the European than it is in the GFS, but it is there in both models. We see another reinforcing trough by midweek next week, going right into the one that's already lived over this area, and that's what's going to keep that ridging event happening in the west. So take note that we get out there pretty far in the forecast, and there's big differences in the models, but that's always expected. So let's just try to understand where we land at this point. So let's take you to the end of this week. So first of all, look. There's the ridge coming in, large ridge by the time we get into this weekend. Playing into early next week. This would be day 10. So this is the 13th, 14th, and 15th. Now the models are attempting to push the ridge a bit farther to the east, bring back some flow, suggesting that through the middle of the month we go back over into a stormier pattern in the midsection of the country. Hot, but stormy. See, there's still flow coming in. We've not yet blocked this whole thing up like sometimes happens in summer. So it appears that it's primarily going to be a week 1 versus week 2 thing. So if you take a look, the newest updates from the CPC, the European model, and the GFS. So the European model, keeping the drier conditions in through this corridor around longest. You can almost see that still here in the CPC. But we're expecting stormier conditions to begin to show back up throughout the western mountains and then press into the central part of the United States. Biggest difference on these maps is down here in the southeast. With the European keeping the deeper low here and the frontal boundary farther to the south, that's where they're keeping the storms. The GFS pulls us out a bit farther and leaves that front lingering here, keeping this whole region much, much, much wetter. There's not tropical development here yet that I can see, but there is. That's where the wettest conditions are expected to be in the GFS. So good 3-model look here. I did start making a new map for you. This would be the artificial intelligence forecast. And this is its day 8 through 14 based off today. So we're looking at week 2 anomalies. Just take it in. and compare it to the other forecasts I just showed you, but it's just another point of reference here. What I now want to talk about are these temperatures. This is great. Frost map over the next 7 days. That's the least amount of gray we've seen in a long time. Here's what those high temperatures are actually doing, though. We're going to get up deep into the hundreds and upper 90s here across the western plains. Our trough still lives where all the colder air is in the northwest. Remember, that's going to push into Canada on Tuesday into Wednesday, and that's when the excessive heat begins to really build throughout the west, especially in the Central Valley of California. Tuesday and Wednesday, easily getting up above 104, 105 degrees. With all that heat going into the west, by the end of the week, the trough digs into the Great Lakes. That's just the response of this ridge building here. We see hundreds down into Texas. We get into Friday. It's the same pattern going into our weekend. There's Saturday and Sunday. So again, what this is this is flow just doing something like this around a low while the ridge builds into this area. But by Sunday, we already get a sense of some sort of shifting around in this pattern. Until you get there, though, this is what the total accumulated GDDs are going to look like. Now, this first week of June is going to be critical for a lot of folks to get stuff replanted if they can and get some heat on this early crop. I'm thinking specifically about some of the people that I live around here in the Midwest having to do some replanting. There's quite a bit of heat in this pattern. Despite the cooler weather that comes in here, we're not having any trouble getting, for example, in this area, another 120 GDDs or more in the next 7 days. From there, let's go out there and look at the day 5 through 10 pattern. Now, the ensembles want to keep this around for a while. Okay, so this is day 5 through 10, and this is day 10 through 15. It's the European model that shifts the ridge farther here quicker and starts to return a stormier pattern to the western United States and then eventually into the Midwest very, very quickly into mid-June. But overall, if you just kind of look at it, that was the GFS. The European doesn't really back away from keeping that warmth in place for a while in the west. So it's just going to be this transition that's going to have to happen at that point. Now, thinking this all through, there's been a few things I've been watching very carefully. Remember last week we discussed where the, how the MJO was going to possibly move toward helping something form maybe here in the Pacific or here in the Caribbean. And once we get into June, this is a time of year where we have to start watching things. A lot of us over the weekend were just taking note that over the last 90 days, the loop current, which is right in through here, has been exceptionally warm. And for many of us, the loop current is a critical piece for any sort of tropical development. For example, in 2005, Hurricane Katrina, which came out of the Bahamas, when it hit the loop current and got that extra kick from all that heat, it went from like Cat 1 to Cat 5 very, very quickly before going toward New Orleans. So to already see the loop current with this much additional heat in it compared to average is something we're going to have to continue to watch. But most of the Atlantic is still very, very warm, and that's going to get us really thinking about what June could be. So let's bring this up because we typically think of June 1st as the kind of the start of the hurricane season. It's normally a very slow start. This is just looking at the frequency of storms as a function of time of year that we've gotten data going back to 1944. But we have to watch out for these early season systems. If you're curious, doing some research on this from the National Hurricane Center, this is their research, if we look at named systems in the month of June, it's primarily a Gulf of Mexico or far western, Atlantic setup. And so that's being aided by that loop current that we just talked about here. So I just want to let you know that we're going to watch this carefully. Bigger picture as we start to wrap this up, this would be the June 1st ocean temperatures. And what's happened over the last month is this has expanded a bit, which we know the more this expands into the Gulf of Alaska, the greater the risk of that summer ridging event sitting right down here in the southwest. This has continued to stay cool. Our La Nina continues to build, and the Atlantic is just kind of filled in with quite a bit of warmth. Now, this particular ocean temperature pattern is fragile, and what I mean by that is, if this warm water fails to move into the midsection of into this midsection of the Gulf of Alaska, then we start to increase. It doesn't sound a guarantee, but we increase the risk of the ridging being here versus here. And without a Bermuda high already in place, I get concerned that that ridge has no trouble moving its way to the east, which would set itself up in the central U.S. or the Midwest, meaning that we could be looking at drought stress growing in, from basically Texas over to Alabama, and then everywhere north. I'm talking about this whole region. So we have to watch these ocean temperatures very carefully going forward, and we'll continue to do that. I want to show you, though, the newest CPC update for the month of June. And again, I think the CPC has been doing a fantastic job assessing this pattern. And as you take note of it here, there's a lot of consistency with what I just showed you over the next couple of weeks and what you've got in this particular graphic. So I've got no complaints about their forecast here. I think this is pretty solid. The one thing I will be watching, though, is this. The European model continues to do this with our 7-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies. We know that the front half of June has this look, but what it's attempting to do by mid-June and later June is give us a lot of heat that's sitting right here in this part of the plains. And this would suggest something like this in the jet stream pattern, putting the ridge not here over the continental divide or even over the west, but instead closer to maybe the 100th meridian would be where it could be. So you'd have storms that will cascade over the top of this, but the closer you inch toward that ridge, the greater the risk is going to be for drier conditions. I will go ahead and show you the 30-day anomalies from now through July the 5th, just to show you that the model's staying consistent with itself being drier. But what will be so critical will be to watch where the local moisture that's been coming this spring gets recycled to keep storms rolling through this particular area, possibly to eastern Texas as well. So there's a lot of nuance to these two maps that you're looking at here. We don't take them verbatim. We're just trying to pick up on what the pattern's doing. Again, I'm going to come back to the expertise of the Climate Prediction Center showing us this. Finally, today, I want to give you just a quick global update on the next 10 days of precipitation. There's been a lot of focus put on the Russian wheat belt here, getting out of Ukraine into this part of Russia. We continue to show drier farther to the south, maybe storms farther to the north. And what's important about that is if you just look at the temperatures, we are expecting over the next 10 days for average temperatures. And I left this in degrees Fahrenheit, so I apologize. My new maps are going to be more consistent with imperial units versus metric units. But, to see the 10-day forecast being 15 plus degrees warmer in Fahrenheit than average is substantial, meaning that if it does rain, we'll likely evaporate a lot of that away. And this is going to continue to be a concern for us. Take note how warm South America is too, and how dry we are down here. So we'll just keep an eye on all of these things, and we'll talk again in the morning. Have a good one. Thanks.